Well, recent developments have once again raised concerns about the instability of coalition government. The EFF are not only targeting the IFP, but has vowed to sweep out DA officials as well, after facing several motions of no confidence against her, of course, one of which was overturned in court. The former Joburg DA Mayor, Mpho Phalatse, has been removed. South Africa's richest metro, Johannesburg, now has a new mayor, even though his party received no more than 9,000 votes in the local government elections. Now, the city of Joburg, Ekurhuleni and Tshwane have all been led by multi-party coalitions led by the DA since the local government elections. In Ekurhuleni, minority parties filed motions of no confidence in the DA council speaker, Raymond Dhlamini, but the meeting collapsed last week after political parties fought inside the chambers. The DA and the speaker have received an urgent interdict from the Gauteng High Court to halt another special sitting today. But of course, this may be staving off the inevitable in Ekurhuleni. To discuss, we're joined by Rivonia Circle Director Tessa Dooms. Tessa, thank you for being with us as always. Firstly, let's look at the overall picture. I mean, there was a hope that the political system or politicians themselves would become more mature and essentially we'd grow into this whole coalition thing, but it doesn't seem like that.
Well, I think that it's about more than the maturity of political parties. It's also about an understanding of how our political system works. So firstly, in terms of the way in which this mayor has come to power, it illustrates that, number one, every vote matters. So even people who vote for what is deemed small parties are voting in ways that can actually be quite consequential. And so any refrains about small parties being wasted votes or individual votes not mattering, we now know that that is absolutely untrue. And also that the way we vote is that it's councillors that represent us who make decisions in council, and the same is true for MPLs and MPs at provincial and national level. And so when we vote for parties and we vote for people who are in parties, we are always running the risk of them representing us in ways that we may not like afterwards, which is why it's so important that we have a lot more accountability and a lot more sensibilities that the people who represent us in these councils actually care about what it is we think and say as the voting population, as the citizens of this country and as the residents of these cities. Right now, our system allows parties to make decisions by themselves, parties to make decisions that their party bosses want, regardless of what the residents think, and that's our fundamental problem, not coalitions themselves.
And is that undermining democracy, do you believe? I mean, what about the will of the people? So I understand what you're saying, that every vote counts, and the small parties then have some clout. But what about those voters who voted for the big parties?
But it is those big parties that those voters voted for who have ensured that this mayor gets elected. In the same way that Mpho Phalatse was not the mayor whose party had the most votes in council. In fact, the ANC has the most votes in that council by a very, very large majority. They're just not 50+1. And so we should have the same concerns with Mpho Phalatse if that's the argument we're making about Tapelo Ahmed. But that's not the right argument to make, because it is the majority of seats in council that made the decision, and that majority of seats represents the majority of voters. It represents the majority of votes. Our problem isn't that this is an illegitimate mayor and democracy is not being followed. Our problem is democracy is being followed to the letter, where we have given over power to political parties to vote on our behalf, and we don't hold them accountable to the way they vote on our behalf.
All right, so let's just look at how this is going to play out. The IFP says the EFF has made it clear that it wants government posts. So it says in Ekurhuleni, the idea is that the EFF will get one of the positions and the small parties again will nominate a mayor. So it gives the small parties a collective voice, as it were. So if that's the way it's going right now, I mean, maybe things will change. We know they do change. But then we could see a lot of small party mayors, maybe across the country, do you think?
And that wouldn't be anti-democratic or problematic unless those people are not competent people, right? That's a problem, but they could be incompetent people from big parties. The issue is not the size of the party. In the Western Cape, there is a municipality that has a mayor who's an independent candidate. Now, an independent candidate could get 1 million votes, but they're only going to occupy 1 seat. That's the way it works. But that doesn't mean that that person isn't competent to be mayor, that that person couldn't lobby the rest of council to support them, that that person couldn't be functional in a coalition. We must stop getting away, we must get away from the idea that we elect mayors. We don't elect mayors. That's not what our system allows for. And if you want a different system where we directly elect mayors and the number of votes an individual gets is the reason why they get voted for, that's a different conversation about electoral reform, and one I think one conversation I think the country actually needs to be having.
All right, and I hope we can have that in future, but if you don't mind, I just want to stick with this, just so we can look at the current developments. Because you're making a really strong argument. But the IFP says, look, this small mayor in Joburg and the other mayors will be proxy mayors for the EFF and the ANC. So what do you think about that statement? Will the big parties that are working together and giving something to the smaller parties ultimately have the power?
I think that is absolutely the case. And I think there's a bigger risk that we're running there. It's not only that they'll be proxies, it's that now the people who are making the decisions, Luthuli House, that's making the decisions about what happens in the city of Joburg, are not going to be the ones held accountable for it. And that's a bigger concern. So that it's a small party or a small mayor is irrelevant. We must ask, why are we not able to hold councillors to account? That's the main issue.
And how do we hold them to account?
In our system, unfortunately, for PR councillors that are brought in by their parties, we can only hold them accountable in the ways that they choose through their parties, because they're representing their parties, not us. But at local government level, there are also many councillors who are ward councillors. And especially for the ANC in the city of Joburg, the majority of their councillors are in fact ward councillors. And so those ward councillors by their communities can be held accountable. You can call for community meetings, you can call for meetings with your ward committees, and we can actually start to push for those people to account for the kinds of decisions that they're making, the kinds of votes that they're giving, and also push for them to be removed if they're not listening to their communities, because that's the power of direct representation.
All right, thank you for your views. I have about 1 million more questions for you. I hope we can chat again. That was the director of Rivonia Circle, Tessa Dooms. And of course, the other issue is what's going to happen in KwaZulu-Natal now if the EFF goes through with their promise to remove all IFP mayors. And remember, this is multiple district municipalities and other municipalities as well.